Hello listeners, we are your co-hosts Janine Bailey and Marie Quigley for the Empower World Coaching and Leadership Podcast. Empower World brings guests who are making a difference to the world to inspire coaches and leaders who lead with mind, heart and soul.
Hello and welcome listeners. I'm Marie Quigley from Empower World, and today I'm with the wonderful coach Jo Sheasby. She's a professional certified coach with the ICF. She's part of a wonderful community that I am part of here in Sheffield. And Jo's a really interesting human being as well as a coach. And she's done some transitions in her life. She's a traveler like I am. And we met recently, actually a while back, but we've had a lot of conversations recently about coaching and learning and developing. And the last conversation we had, I said to her, it'd be really good if we could record these conversations, because I think a lot of coaches would be grateful to hear our thinking around this, and also start to consider what some of the conversations could mean for them. So Jo kindly said, yes, let's do a podcast. And here we are together having a coffee and a normal chat as if we were in a coffee shop. So welcome, Jo, to the Empower World podcast.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. It's been on my mind for a while because I do love our conversations. They're not always about coaching, but they're always deep and interesting. And I always come away thinking, yeah, that's something I haven't thought about, or that's something I'd like to think about more. And I know we met, was it last Friday? And I've been thinking about a lot of our conversation that we've had over the weekend. So I don't know where we're going to go with this conversation, listeners, but I'm sure it's going to be interesting.
Super. So no pressure.
No pressure. It might be absolute rubbish, but hopefully it won't.
It wouldn't be the first time.
Jo, before we begin, Jo, tell us a little about you and your work, and maybe a little bit about your life.
Super. Yes, I've been coaching for 7 years now. So I've started off coaching also working in another organisation so I could build the business up, and I've been coaching full-time since 2019. So made that wonderful decision to go full-time just before the pandemic hit. Which all worked out well, obviously in hindsight, but at the time it was like, what am I doing?
It did work out well, because we've had conversations about the courage to continue doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was I'd never coached online. I'd always done my coaching. I was living in London and I was always coaching in person. And I haven't had much experience online, especially with video. I don't know if I'd had a video call before the pandemic hit, even with friends. So it's a real learning curve, steep learning curve to move on to online coaching. And to be fair, now if people ask me what's the difference, I think from my experience, online is actually more suited to coaching in a way, because you have the quiet, people can be in a space where they're comfortable, you can really focus, there's no distractions. And so actually that whole process, I came out of it the other side thinking this is actually a much better space for it. And it also then gives you a lot more flexibility in who you can work with and when you can work, etc. So it was very positive overall. But in March 2020, I had no idea that was going to be the case.
And that was a really interesting time in the world, right? In the UK, people were really locking down again and looking at the world in a very, very different space. And I know my own clients at the time, they appreciated still being able to do this work. And for some of them, it was a lifesaver being able to come on in the Zoom sessions wherever they were in the world. So I really appreciate you saying that about how it potentially changed your perspective on the work you do as a coach.
Absolutely. It was a very interesting thing. I often talk about my dad, my lovely dad, who's always there in these times. And he said, what's going to happen with the business then? And I said, well, Dad, it could, fall off a cliff because people can't, there was a lot of redundancy and there was a questioning around what people are going to spend on, or it could be really useful because this is when it's most needed, because everyone was confused and scared and people couldn't think things through. So, I said to him, it could be either or sort of thing. And it turned out to be the latter. So that was great.
And you also made a move from where you lived, didn't you, at that time?
Yeah, that's right. So I'd planned on moving back. So I'm from Derbyshire originally, and I'd always wanted to live in Sheffield because it's very close to the peaks, but there's also the city and the people are lovely. And so I'd planned to move in March of 2020 to Sheffield and sort of leave London. And of course, that was delayed a couple of years for that reason. But yeah, it was those best laid plans that you couldn't have written it that was going to come in the way of those. So it was just adjusting to having to spend longer in London than I planned to, but under very, very different circumstances. So
yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you are in Sheffield and we both met, because we both came back around the same time. Yeah. And it's an interesting transition, isn't it? So I know you're not originally from Sheffield, but you're very close.
Yes.
But it is an interesting move to come back to something that's familiar when you've been gone a long time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I left home when I was 18. Literally 18 and a month, I think I was. And I went to Spain to learn Spanish. I had a real, again, can't tell you why, just a real intuition that I wanted to learn Spanish, or a language, but Spanish in particular. And I have no idea. But at the age of 18, with the bravado you have at 18, off I went. And I came back obviously to visit family, but I never really lived back in this area again, up until the time when I moved back again. And I am the most shocked of anybody that after leaving at 18, living in I think it's 11 or 12 different countries over 14, 15 years, spending 10 years in London, I'm probably the most shocked of anyone that I actually ended up back here. And it's the first, I felt like home in many places, but I really feel roots to this area, and it's taken me by surprise as much as anybody else. And like you say, I wasn't from Sheffield, but my family, my mum's side is from Sheffield. Came here as kids for many, many years. So it does feel like I'm back home, and it feels amazing. It feels great. So I'm very, very happy to be here.
Oh, that's great. And you mentioned that intuition as an 18-year-old that was kind of driving you. And my experience of you is that you're deeply connected to that part of you, that wisest part of you that allows you to make brave decisions. I mean, I know some of your story, perhaps not all of it, but you always strike me as a woman who taps into your own wisdom, and when tough decisions have to be made or exciting decisions, you come back to yourself and get to know if this is right for you. Would you agree with that kind of description of you?
Yeah, it's funny because I was reflecting on this. I always struggle. People say, what did you do before coaching? And I'm like, well, how long have you got? Because it was an eclectic mix of different things. And I think that's when I look at, people will build a career in one area maybe, or, people follow their own path. And for me, variety, exploration, exploring, learning new things, they've always been a big driver, I think, for me, having not known it at the time. But it's always been something where the decision's always been made on the feeling, I think, at the end of the day. Even down to when I moved to Spain to learn Spanish, I had a place at Nottingham University to teach. So I thought, I'm going to go and teach, going to go and do primary school teaching. And I remember literally being in Malaga for probably a month and sitting with some friends on the beach, and they were from Germany and Holland and all over the place. And it was I just loved the international feeling. And I thought, I have to be in this environment. I need to be here. And I remember saying, because I'm not in my youth anymore. I remember saying at the time, I'm just going to go to the payphone, because we didn't have mobiles back then. And I remember just getting up and going to the payphone and phoning UCAS and cancelling my placement and just saying, I don't know what's right for me. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I know that that's not where I need to be next year, and cancelling. And I can't tell you why, but I can tell you I was 100% certain that was the best thing to do. And I don't know why that is. So, but again, it's that intuition. It's that knowing, that embodiment. You don't need the logic. You don't need the why. You can feel it. So, and that was the start of it.
Well, you've sent a shiver, as you've shared that, you sent a shiver down my body thinking, an 18-year-old making a brave decision like that. And I'm sure that there were many people in your life that could have been screaming, no, don't make that decision. And you trusted yourself and you went on that journey of learning and discovery in a different way.
Yeah.
And that kind of is a nice segue into some of the things we were talking about in the cafe the other day, really about being in a state of learning.
Mm-hmm.
You start with what's coming up for you about that, Jo.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's very interesting actually, and I was really pleased we had coffee last week, because I thought, oh, great, and that's the thing, isn't it, about this wonderful work we do, that often you can do it on your own, and it's really important to be able to talk through where you are in your journey, what you're experiencing in this work, because it does evolve and change as you go. And I'd got to a point where I'd started to look into, like I said, I've been doing it 7 years. I did a great training course. I learned some wonderful things, and you put them into practice. And it starts becoming, as you know, as opposed to sort of thinking through what you're doing, it becomes natural, and you start to follow your intuition, and you get to a stage where you're feeling really confident that you're able to really help someone in whatever it is they're looking to work on in coaching. But for me, it's always about learning more. It's always about pushing those boundaries in terms of what else can I bring, what else will be in service of my clients. And so I've started to look into different areas and different approaches to coaching. Yeah. And it's in one of which is it's a little bit more quite a bit more directive than what I would normally do. So I'm very much an advocate of pure coaching, of creating that space and giving that support so someone can really do their best thinking. So it's very little direction from me, and I'm exploring new areas which are quite a bit more directive. And to be fair, it threw me into a tailspin a couple of weeks ago, because you start questioning what you know, and you see whereas I've seen huge impact from pure coaching, and then I moved into this area and started practicing, and you see huge impact from that as well, and it starts banging up against each other, and you start questioning yourself. And it was a bit of an insight last week when we met, that actually I'm just learning something new. And that's the outcome, is that it's discombobulating, it feels uncomfortable, and it still takes me by surprise, even all these years later, after doing all these different things. It still takes on that. Why do I feel like this? Why is it? Oh, I'm no good. I should just give up and go and be a gardener, or, you know. And it's that doubt and uncertainty and question that comes in. And it was really wonderful to be able to talk through this with you all on Thursday and go, you know what, I'm just learning again. I'm just back to the space of learning.
It is fascinating, isn't it, as adults, that we think we know, and then we go into the realm of the unknown, and we kind of beat ourselves up because now we don't know. Whereas a child doesn't beat themselves up. They're like, oh, okay, brilliant. Another experience. Well, they're not cognitively thinking that, but they embrace the learning in a way that I think many adults, as you mentioned, you know, we can beat ourselves up, we can judge ourselves. I don't know. And therefore, what does that mean about everything that I've learned before? And what does it mean about my practice if somebody's challenging my way of thinking and being in this work? Because we are here to support others in many ways in their own thinking, and support them to be divergent in their thinking, you know, to challenge their thinking. And we can get stuck in our own way of being and learning and think that this is the way it should be. And I think if we get stuck like that, then we need to be challenged. And it sounds like currently you are.
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely a process. And you're right. It's getting familiar with being uncomfortable so that you can sit through it. For me, it's being able to sit with it and go, okay, this feels uncomfortable, and coming back to what you know. I think that's what and again, this is only the last couple of days where I've come back to this. Yeah. I know that presence in coaching is the most important thing. One of the most important things is being present, switching off the thinking, not thinking, well, should I go with pure coaching, or should I bring in this model, or should I? That's just going to knock you off course. So I know that presence is important, and I know that intuition is important, and it's going back to knowing or trusting what I know. So it's definitely been a process, which is right, calm down, stop overthinking this, get back into the work that you know, and sit with your intuition and give yourself a break and see what comes up for you. Because that's at the end of the day, that is where the magic happens. And if I listen to my intuition, and that's not logic, that's not me going, well, if I bring this in, we could go there. That's got nothing to do with it. There's an intuition, and that sometimes is asking permission. Is there I've got something in my back pocket. Would it be useful to explore? That might be the intuition, and then let them take it forward. Let them decide.
I love your thinking around this. And actually, as I've been doing my own thinking about our conversation on Friday, that's what I've been playing with. And one of the things I do as a mentor coach is I support the client, the coach, to think about what could they invite the client to experiment with. So we are trained in many, there's lots of tools, let's say, that we learn as coaches, and there's lots of things that we pick up on our journey, and sometimes that presence is the only thing that's needed. So being with somebody and letting the conversation evolve and the experience evolve. And sometimes our intuition goes, do you know what might be really useful here? And it's the invitation. I think this is the key. It's the invitation. Client, I have something that might be useful. Would you be willing to experiment? No, Marie, I'm not interested in experimenting today. I want to keep with my process of thinking. Fine. Or yes, Marie, actually, I am interested in experimenting today. Let's see what happens. And I love that. For me, that is not directive. That is bringing something in that might be useful, but the key is asking permission and trusting that the client knows.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And if that process is more directive, it's not the same thing. Like you say, you're asking permission, and they're leading, they're deciding if that's something. Because that was my confusion, was, well, pure. And I know that sitting and being present and giving that space is very, very impactful. It's happened for me. I've received the impact, the benefit of that myself. So I have trust in that process. But then I see a more directive model also having great impact. And so my confusion was, well, again, which is the right one, which is the best one to use? And I think that's where you start to get confused. And, I speak, a lot of people who are coming into coaching now will ask the question, what's the best tools? What do you find? And it can get really confusing. And I think that's right. It's about knowing that each one can have impact. But it's the power of the best way, or the way to approach it is always by asking permission, by asking somebody what they think would be useful.
Yeah, Jo, it might help our listeners for them to hear what happened and why this kind of emergent thinking happened for you. Would you be willing to share the experience? Because I think it might be useful.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's the new area I'm looking into now, and I've done the first part of training is constellations. So it's systemic coaching constellations with the wonderful John Whittington and company, and it's fantastic. It's really great. But like I said, there is a more direction in that, and please don't ask me to explain what it's all about because I'm still getting my head around that. But basically, it looks at the systems that we come from. So family systems, work systems, different groups that we've belonged to. So there's a real big emphasis on as humans, our need to belong to different systems, and how this affects us then in our current situation and in our current systems. And the way that you explore it in this area is by mapping out, so creating a constellation and mapping out the situation, so you can see it from a different perspective. And it's much more of an embodied reaction. So it's logic to one side, it's how you feel as you're moving the different parts around. And that could be me and a colleague, or it could be me and a anxiety, for example, or something that's present for me in a system. We can use a piece to represent that thing, and then map to see how you feel as you move the pieces around. So it's very directive. It's you using a different format. It's visual. It's getting outside of your head and the logic, for example. And the coach's role can be, it's a lovely balance between leaving the space for somebody to really think through what they're seeing or what they're feeling, and not interrupting that, because it comes in waves. You might get an initial insight from it, but the longer that you look at this physical map, the more that comes up for you from a different part, from your gut, from your intuition. So it's a really, really, it's like walking a tightrope between how long do you leave that, and how do you make a suggestion, which is part of the process too. So it's around about giving sentences to say to release different things from the system, release loyalties, and to move forward. If you've had a pretty tricky ending to a previous job role, or if someone's left your organization under a cloud as such, those endings haven't been completed well. So it's about giving somebody sentences and the words to move past that as such. So it's quite directive. And when I was working with a coach, and I remember I'd sort of mapped out my particular situation, and I'd put my bits in it, and it was about, and I'm very happy to share, it's about my attitude to money and my relationship with money, and how that impacts my business, and also outside of business in my private life as well. And we had these different counters in there. And I thought, you know what, there's something in there that comes from my dad, I'm sure, because as kids, you do get these beliefs and these assumptions. So I moved the piece that was my dad, I moved it into this map, and looked at it. Nothing was coming up, and felt quite neutral, just fine. And she was brilliant, this coach, and she just left me to think about it and said, no, it's not, there's nothing, he's not in this, there's nothing here. And I moved the piece back out again. And I went through a few different movements and nothing was coming up. And she said, would you mind, and we were practicing, so we were both practicing, would you mind if I tried out some questions here, some sentences, some resonant sentences? And I was like, yeah, because I'm feeling stuck here. I don't know what to do. I'm feeling stuck. So she got out her book, as I say, this is all practicing. She got out her book and she gave me a sentence to say, and she said, bring your dad back into this. And where would you put him? If you're looking, and shame had come into it. That's right. So we're talking about shame and money and shame, and where did this all come in? And she said, put your dad's piece back in at this point into the conversation. Where would you put it? And I put it right outside the system. And she asked me, she said to me, can you repeat this sentence? And it was and I can't remember the words to this day, but the feeling is still there. And it was something around, I thank you with respect for the hard work you did. It was all combining. My dad worked very hard when we were children, so we didn't see much of him, and money was it's a big part of our family. And I remember saying this, and as I was saying this with this feeling, I have no idea where it came from. This feeling came up, and I was in floods of tears within a millisecond, whereas having that same piece hadn't had any emotional impact on me beforehand. But it was because she had proposed this tool, this direction that we could go in. And it was the process. That is the process of systemic coaching and constellations. This is a process that you go through. So she trusted the process. I trusted the process. We had the constellation. She gave me the sentences, and it unlocked. And I couldn't put into words, and I probably still would struggle in what it's unlocked in me, but it's given me an ease that I didn't have before. And so then, of course, it's like, oh my goodness, that was so powerful. I've experienced that in such a powerful way. And so then it comes back into play. Well, what do you do? And I think it's taken me a while, but it is just, it's use your intuition. She gave me time to sit and think, but there was her intuition was, we're stuck. I'll suggest this and see.
Yeah, and I think what you said was she invited you, would you be open to having this experience?
Yeah.
And we know that when a client says, yes, I'm open to this, then the possibilities of becoming unstuck are there. So even if you're feeling stuck, if you say yes to experimenting, it can create a shift. And interestingly, she might have given you a sentence, but it was you moving that piece and using those words. And, sometimes when I do constellations, I'll invite the client to say it in their own words, but it's it sounds like that invitation to practice gratitude for your dad and all of the experience he had was the thing that unlocked something within you as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The verbalizing of that, saying it from my system. And I didn't need to change her words. I couldn't. I was crying. But it was, there was,
So they resonated with you. And, you know, we in our coach training, we bring the practice of gratitude in as part of the process to support the client to recognize, even if things are really hard, where is the gratitude in this? And, you know, that could be considered a little bit directive because we're assuming that there's there's a good side to everything. But it often that unlocks that opposite of what we think, unlocks something that we just didn't expect.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we can get stuck in the problem, the why this is difficult. Oh, this was difficult growing up. But if we look at a different perspective, it's profound what can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It was logic. I was looking at the logical side. I was doing too much work in my head. And what this enabled was me to go back to the gut to unearth things that I hadn't. It was just the way of looking at it. I was holding on to all that stuff. The second sentence you gave me was around, with respect, I leave you with your thinking around money. It was just incredible. And it was brilliant when we talk about coaching, and especially when you're starting to coach, the belief that just being present and listening and giving silence, the belief that that's going to have an impact is really hard, especially for new coaches to understand and to really have confidence in. You have to experience it to be able to really appreciate how powerful the process is.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. To do our own work as coaches and come to a place of learning and exploration and discovery for ourselves. If we don't do the work, how on earth can we expect our clients to do the work themselves? And you and I have talked about this before, Jo, and I know Janine and I absolutely believe this. We cannot do the deep work with our client if we haven't done our own deep work, because we don't know how to access that part. If we're in our thinking part of our bodies most of the time and haven't stepped into the other parts, because we're a whole, right? So there's other parts of us. If we haven't stepped into those other parts, explored them, stayed a bit longer with the uncomfortableness of maybe a difficult emotion or a process of learning that's, not very nice. I don't want to go there. I don't want to stay here. If we stay there, then we know that this impacts, and therefore we can be much braver in our work with our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. We can give ourselves our own permission to shut up and refocus and be present and not to panic, because that's again, especially when you're learning, there's all these other urges. Our brains are trained. They're trained to give solutions. We get dopamine hit when we give a good solution, and someone says that's a good idea. We feel amazing. Of course, we want that.
That's so true. My son sent me a really interesting podcast the other day, and I think his name is Jordan B. Peterson, and he was talking to Dr. Ellen Langer. She's written a book about mindfulness and the body. I think it's called The Mindful Body. And they had a podcast, and in it, at the end of the conversation, it struck me, because this is a philosophy at Empower World we absolutely believe in, and I've heard you talking about it too. People kind of stick their fingers up at authority when somebody's telling them what to do. It's because it's not ours. And when we're trying to work things out, if somebody gives you the solution, you are very unlikely to put it into place, because your cognitive ability or your ability to embody the learning has not happened. So sometimes you can even forget that somebody's given you advice. But if you, as the coach, invites the client to do some thinking around it, even if it is a bit, as you say, a tool that can be useful, your cognitive processing, you are doing the work.
Yeah.
And that's what allows the wisdom to come in. And that can be uncomfortable because it's a new process of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. It's neuroscience. That's the other thing that I would have, if I was going to bring anything into coaching, neuroscience for me is a real passion. I love reading about it myself, but helping people to understand why they might be having issues with their thinking, because our brains are wired in a specific way. But it's exactly like you say, Marie, when we have an insight in terms of a solution, what we could do, it actually creates a neural pathway. There's a physiological change in our brains that happens, which enables us to really understand it. So it's not, I know it, it's like, I know it. And it's a physiological change, and it releases dopamine. So we remember it, we understand it in a different way. And therefore we're much more likely to trust in it. We have confidence in the solution, put it into practice. So yeah, absolutely. It's so true.
And I'm thinking about this magical insight that you've gotten about money and how you're still processing it, and it's still kind of, you're embodying it as well as your mind, your body's moving through it, your intuition's moving through it. Had you been told that this is what happened and this is what you've got to do, that connection to your learning wouldn't have happened.
No.
And therefore you wouldn't have got the insights you've gotten.
No, absolutely not. I can say 100%. There's no chance, because I would be questioning it. Again, the brain, it wants to keep you safe. So it will always analyze things that you're given to look for threat. Why is this not true? Why is it not why doesn't it, why is it not in my case true? Where's the holes in this as such? And it would have been very much an intellectual knowing. And a lot of the work I do with people is, I know I should feel this way. I know this should be the case. I know I should be more confident. I know I'm good at my job, but I don't know it. And you have to have that cognitive change, that physiological change, to really embody it. And the physiological bit happens here, but a lot of the time it starts in the gut. It starts in this intuition, the gut area, and that it's all part of the process. But we spend too long in here, and that's coming from, I am not, and it makes people laugh who know me, because I'm probably the most logical. One of my jobs before was in tech startups and then in philanthropy, but very much based on data and data analysis. And I love a fact. I love a bit of data. I love logic. It's one of my real passions. So I'm not naturally a person who before this particular part of my life would have had that much confidence in the felt senses that we have. And I am very, very guilty of it, going, oh, I'm not woo-woo. We're here, and everyone was saying, oh, you're not going to coaching, it's very woo-woo sort of thing. And you'd hear these terrible words banded around. But I've learned through experience, through having those experiences, that the intuition and that listen to different parts of the body, not just the brain, is what really does enable you to know and there's no getting around it. And I've worked with people, who come in and they're very logical and they're very straightforward about things, and their whole jobs, so the careers are based around fact and truth, and we've had sessions and they're like, I can't explain it, but it feels different. That's what's happening, and listening to it from a different way, you've understood something in a different way. So yeah.
I think, I don't know what your thoughts about this. I know mine. So I'll come to ask you first. Do you think we all have the ability to tap in? That's a very coaching expression, but to learn not just from a cognitive way of thinking. Do you think we all have that capacity?
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely do. I think because we're all made up of the same stuff physiologically. And I think the problem is that life has got so fast. Life is so fast. There's so much noise. What society says you should do, what your family says you should do, what makes sense, because we can make sense very easily from figures and a plan and all of these different bits. And so we focus so much time and effort on that we rely a lot on information, on fact, on knowledge. But if we give ourselves the space and the time, get the support, I think it really is. And I think most people, if you ask them, if you explore it, they'll be able to identify something in their past where they have actually tapped into that intuition. They've just not been conscious about it as such. They haven't sort of gone, oh, that's intuition, you know. They'll very, very commonly probably be able to identify something where they just went with their gut, where they just felt that certain about something, where they felt discomfort, because that's the other way. Even when you're feeling discomfort, that's your intuition at play.
Yeah. Yeah, Nina and I say, you know, emotions are signposts to tell you whether you're on or off track in life, and that's your body, your wisdom, whatever you want to call it, speaking to you about at least pay attention to it and get curious about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The reason I'm asking that is because as I'm supporting coaches through mentoring, and I know you said you didn't like the word mastery, but a lot of coaches that I'm supporting are moving towards masterful coaching at master coach level in the ICF. And one of the things that they have to, because many of them have been working in the business for a long time and have fallen into the trap of giving advice and telling people what to do. So more consulting than coaching. And actually, to move into that masterful space, there's a lot of unlearning to do. So there's a lot of supporting the client, not to just think about it, but to pay attention to their energy, to their physiology, to their emotions within their system. And some of those coaches will say, oh, my clients don't do that. They can't do that. And I think that's interesting. So you see, I challenge that, because like you, I think we all have the capability of being able to explore. I just don't think we practice it enough. So exams and schools and universities might think the logical thinking through things are valued so much more. And I think what happens with coaches is they are afraid to do things in case it's woo-woo. Mm-hmm. I love that term. I'll actually introduce it to my clients, and I'll say, look, this might be a bit woo-woo for you. Are you okay with experimenting here? And they'll laugh about that. But actually, so if I come back to my point here, I think some coaches are afraid to do that type of work because it might take them out of being the expert or the one who knows. And I think in our last podcast episode, we talked about the power balance in coaching, Jo. And I think that if a coach some coaches, if they feel they let the power balance go, they might feel not as valuable. Yes. And my experience is that we become more valuable the more we are equal to our clients. What's your thinking on that?
Absolutely. And again, it comes up. And again, when I say, and it comes up all the time, especially if you're marketing yourself as you know, on a previous skill set. So if I say, for example, I coach accountants because I haven't been an accountant, but I coach accountants because I've had this great career in accountancy, then I'm putting myself under pressure that I've got to then perform because I've had this, so I'm coming into this great career in accountancy, whatever it might be. So you're still signaling back to your expertise, which is not what you're bringing into a coaching space. Yeah. And it might be that if they have a question that says, HRM have asked me this, where do I need to go to? That's fine. It's a fact. It's go to this on the website and you can answer it. But I'm not there for that. Yeah. That's not, in my opinion, in a coaching space. It might help them to move along and save them 5 minutes, but it's not going to have a transformational impact. So it's absolutely, we can all, because again, how we're marketing ourselves, how are we being chosen as a coach? We're often feeling that we have to sell ourselves. Or I say that I've spoken to a lot of coaches who feel they have to sell themselves, they're pitching, and again, it's bringing, so what do I bring? And so they're setting up this idea of having to perform maybe, or to bring something, to have an impact, and again, that gets in the way of our thinking. And I talk, I'm absolutely talking from personal experience. And I think I spoke to you about one of my very first big coaching assignments was with a very senior executive in a global bank. And I was absolutely petrified that somebody had chosen to put me in that situation because they'd had coaching with me, and they felt that I would have rapport, I would be able to create the space for this particular person to think things through, and going into that being absolutely petrified and really having to work on bringing it back to the process, bringing it back. What's one thing I need to do in this session is be present, right? That's all you have to do. Bring it back to that. And by the time we finished, he's one of my favorite people. We had a wonderful experience together, and it was just fantastic. So I think it's about, it is very difficult, and it can feel very, very scary to not know, to go in and say, I don't know, I have no idea, I'm here to create. What I do know is how to be present. What I do know is how powerful this process is. And what I do know is how to center myself and bring myself back to being anchored, open, present. And if you can believe, again, and it's if you've experienced how powerful that process is, it's enough for you to be able to just let go and start to practice with being vulnerable as a coach. And it is, especially again, if your career has been forged before coaching, on having to have the answer, on having to provide the solution, on having to be the cleverest person in the room. It's really, really challenging to not know. So yes.
Certainly is. And I'm hearing a few concepts there that you're talking about. So you said at the beginning about the intention. What's your intention? To be present. And I think having a process of intention setting before we go into our work, that's really, really useful to keep us inside ourselves. The second thing you talked about, was what is your presence, your ability to get presence. How do you do that? And then there were some things about not knowing and being okay with not knowing. But there's also the trust that the client knows. From what you're saying, the client absolutely knows. So you're believing in the client. You have a philosophy of coaching that I don't interfere. I might know some useful information that might help them connect with HMRC, but that's not what the coaching is about. So you believe in the process, you have a philosophy of coaching that you're clear about, and then you be who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's what my job is. My job as a coach is to support that person to enhance their thinking, to gain insight, to connect the dots that are in their own head. They're the best person. Even if I'd done the same job as them for 5 years before they stepped into the role, they are the best person to know what needs to happen in that specific situation at this point in time. And all my suggestions are going to do are going to cloud that, because they're going to be analysing, well, why wouldn't that work? Or what might, that not be the best for, and it doesn't give them the confidence that they've got there as well. That's the other thing when you're telling somebody what to do, it's not helping to build their confidence, because again, they're being handed something. So it's not something that's going to help them to have confidence in their own ability or in the solution that's being presented to them as well. So absolutely.
So now I'm hearing a clear kind of definition between your experience of this new learning, where the coach brought this tool in, and telling people what to do. There's a big difference between that, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So the directive for me is telling people what to do, but the invitation to do your thinking through or your experiencing of the work through a different vessel is an experimentation.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think just talking about it now, as happens in coaching conversations, which it feels very similar in terms of what we're doing here, it's about for whose benefit. Am I bringing this tool in here because I want to practice it? Do I want to look like I'm a really great coach, or look really, I've been doing this constellation stuff, and or is it my gut telling me that this is something that could be really useful? So again, it's the intention. It's where is this coming from? If I'm going to suggest this tool, for whose benefit is that? Is it for my dopamine hit, or is it for the service of the client? And I think that is just coming to me as we're speaking as a key differentiation between the two.
I love that. And I'm going to challenge us on that again, because I think if we learn something new, it is interesting to experiment with it and test it out and see how it works with different clients. And so I also have a philosophy. If I'm going to experiment with it with the client's permission, it might fall flat on its face. And that's okay. It's about, let's test it out. No, it's not working. Let it go, move on. And where do you want to go now, client? Because learning these things, learning new things, I'm a big fan of learning, like yourself. We do need to practice them to see how they work. And we might put our own little spin on it, with depending on what clients we use them with. But it's not always going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I've just literally done a values session, which we do, we say the bits and pieces, and it might come that somebody feels that they would really benefit from reconnecting with their values, and must have done this 100 times, and then the last one I did, it just didn't hit the mark for some reason. It just did not hit the mark. And so it's again, it's not, even if you're doing something for years and years and years, it can still not be what that person particularly needs. And so it's about going, that's okay, and being detached from that.
Yeah.
And again, linking this, might be going totally off spec here, linking in the work that the reason I think that I've been looking at this in more detail is it's the stage where I am with the coaching, which is, it's letting go of doing the work. It's that you go into sessions and you don't come out exhausted. Mm-hmm. You're able to be with people and not take that on, to let it go. And I think this is where it all came from. To be able to do that, you have to be okay with things not working. You have to be okay with being stuck. You have to be okay with the client leaving, feeling maybe more confused than they did when they started. But and you'll know if you're not okay, because you'll be exhausted and you'll be anxious, and that's not fun. And that will feed into the sessions as well, like desperation or whatever. So it's about working at being able to be okay with all that and let it go.
Yeah. And if you are in your humanness feeling anxious about it, take it to supervision so you can process it and learn about who you're being in the work that allows you to be not okay with not knowing, or the unknown, or the client not getting an aha. Client's not going to get an aha in every session. The client may get an aha 10 years down the line.
Yes, yeah.
If you're okay with that, then that is brilliant.
Yeah.
And I'm not, people pay for this, so I'm not belittling this. I'm not saying that they're not going to get anything out of it in each session. They might. So there's this dynamic, I think, with coaches. I'm being paid for this, so therefore I should be delivering. That keeps us attached to outcomes. But as I've grown as a coach throughout the years, the less attached I am, the more benefit I am to the client. And therefore, the more deeper realizations the clients get. And it could be in my sessions, or it could be 10 years down the line. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's understanding what you're delivering on. And what you're delivering on is your presence, is your ability to tune into your intuition. That's your deliverables as a coach, not that they get a solution or they have an insight in the session, because it's again, what we can and can't control. What I can control is how I'm showing up in a session as a coach, how I'm showing up with my intuition and my presence. That's where my control happens. That's what I'm getting paid for. That's my part of the deal as such, so that the person in front of me can benefit from that support, which we don't get that kind of support from many people, from any people a lot of the time. A lot of people have, they're tied into our outcomes, or they want to, they're not able to listen and they want to suggest, etc., etc. But this is what I'm getting paid for, is to provide that unique space. And it's, you don't see, I think we're used to having an end spreadsheet where you get ticks and, what ticks or grades and whatever. We're used to that. We have been since school, for every subject you're given a grade. It doesn't work like that in coaching. And you have to let go of needing to be validated, I think is what I've learned over the years, is I need to let go. My validation comes from, have I turned up in the way that I wanted to turn up? Have I served this person to the best of my ability? And if not, what am I going to do differently next time? Did I take long enough to center myself before the session, or did I run in off the back of a meeting or whatever? Big no, because you're not centered. And I'll know if I've done it, I'll feel it. So it's, it's bringing it back to that learning as such. So it's, you're right. It's about, it's about that trade of money for service. But what is that? And getting clear for yourself on what that is and being okay with that.
So I think we've been talking a lot today about our ability to be with learning and unlearning and the discomfort of new learning and letting go of old learning and challenging so many things about what we know and what we don't know. It's been a fascinating conversation, as always, Jo. We're coming up to the end of today's podcast. What would you like the listener to walk away with or think about or practice in the coming weeks to support them in this journey of learning and growth?
Oh, that's a good question, Marie. How long have we got? What would I go away with? Compassion for self. I think that's what I didn't have this last couple of weeks. You jump, you learn something and there's discomfort and you react to the discomfort and you question yourself and you lose that compassion for self. So I think it's being, like you said before, it's noticing where, especially if it's something new, if you're starting coaching for new, or like myself, you're starting a new approach or whatever it is, recognizing that discomfort for what it is, which is I'm doing something new and it doesn't feel great. And being compassionate and looking at what can I do? What I can practice this more. I can be compassionate to self. I can looking at what you are doing and seeing the positives out of this and sitting. There's lots of things, sitting with it and not reacting to it in a way that's going to damage you in a way and put you at a disadvantage, because if you're doing that, you're growing, and that's only going to be a benefit to your clients, to your family, to your friends. It's a wonderful thing, and not everybody's courageous enough to do it. So just think about that and get back to your work and keep practicing and reflect. In a couple of years' time, you can look back and go, yeah, that was a learning process.
Thanks for sharing your wisdom, Jo. I know lots of people will want to know how to find you, so please tell us where can people find you if they want to?
So I've just managed to get my website up, which is 7 years in the making, but just kept getting in the way. So that's my business is called Jo Sheasby Coaching, which is quite easy one. So it's www.josheasbycoaching.com. Basically, on there, I say, if you're interested in knowing more, give me a call. So I love nothing more than chatting with people. So if you're not quite sure what coaching is, or if you just want to have a chat, I had a chat with somebody the other day who wanted to become a coach, and they were like, could you just have a quick coffee and talk about it? That's my pleasure. I had that when I was coming through the ranks, and it was a real help. It really did help me come through. So yeah, there's a website. I'm on LinkedIn as well. So there's not many Jo Sheasbys on there. It's a very strange surname. I don't know where it came from, but you can find me along LinkedIn, and I've got my phone number and my email address on there. So do drop me a line and connect, and always happy to chat.
Thank you, Jo. As always, I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation together. Thanks for giving your time and your wisdom and tapping into your intuition and sharing about that discomfort with that learning space. I'm looking forward to meeting you soon for a cup of coffee and more beautiful chats.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me, Marie. It's been a joy for a Monday morning.
And listeners, if you like what you hear, we'd love you to share with your community, share with coaches, leaders who coach, or anybody else who might be interested in exploring their own discovery. We appreciate any feedback you've got for us, and we look forward to speaking with you and working with you again soon. Take care.
Thanks for listening. You can find out more about us on our website, www.empower-world.com, and on our social media networks, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Be empowered.